Hello everyone, Lucas Clay here with the third installment of my Importance of Philosophy series. Once again I will be reading mostly verbatim from the website importanceofphilosophy.com. The material is copyrighted by Jeff Landauer and Joseph Rollins and the video was made by me with their permission. Last time we discussed axioms, existence, the law of identity and consciousness. Today we'll be starting with reality is absolute, and with that I'll begin. Reality is absolute, the primacy of existence. Francis Bacon said, quote, "Nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed," end quote. Francis Bacon knew that, in order to command nature, one must act according to its rules and identity. The statement reality is absolute is the explicit recognition of the primacy of existence. This means that reality is not subject to wishes, whims, prayers, or miracles. If you want to change the world, you must act according to reality. Nothing else will affect reality. If you evade this fact, your actions will most likely not have their desired effects. Your failure will be metaphysical justice. The primacy of existence states the irrefutable truth that existence is primary and consciousness is secondary. Consciousness is the faculty which perceives and identifies existence, things that exists. For two reasons we say that existence is primary, that consciousness requires existence, and that there is no consciousness without existence. Because consciousness identifies existence, there can be no consciousness without something existing to perceive. Nothing can have an identity, to be identified, without existing. The fact that something is identified necessarily implies its existence, which necessarily implies existence in general. Thus there is no consciousness without existence. Because consciousness identifies existence, consciousness itself must exist, in order to do the identifying. Along the lines of Descartes' cogito, to be conscious, to identify, a consciousness must exist. A faculty cannot operate, and not exist at the same time. A verb without a noun makes no sense, and the noun must exist in order for the verb to take place. Consciousness is not responsible for creating reality, or creating an individual reality. It is completely dependent upon reality. Existence is primary, because it is independent of, makes possible, and is a prerequisite of consciousness. All forms of mysticism derive from the false premise of the primacy of consciousness, which is demonstratively false. Also, the assertion that existence somehow requires consciousness, sometimes called the interdependence theory, is arbitrary at best without objective basis. Next is causality. Causality is the law of identity applied over time. It is the identity of actions. An action requires an entity. It presupposes an entity. Without an entity, action is meaningless. There are no floating actions that aren't actions of an entity. Action is a change in the identity of an entity. Every action has a particular nature. The action is determined by the entities involved. The change of the entities occurs based on the identities. A marble, when dropped, falls towards the ground. Its position, part of its identity, changes. This change, though, is dependent on the nature of the objects involved. It is dependent on the earth and the earth's gravity. It is dependent on the friction of the air. A log that burns is also acting. Its identity is changing. In this case, its position stays the same, but its chemical structure is changing. It is changing into ash. It is releasing smoke into the air. The oxygen in the air is being combined with the carbon in the fire. Heat is being released. All of these changes are determined by the identity of the entities involved. As the entities change, so do their natures. With the altered identities, the actions change to match. This continual process of change is all determined by the initial identities. Causality is the term used to describe this dependence of an action on the identities of the entities involved. The changes in the identities of the objects are a result of their identities interacting. This interaction, which is an action, is based on the previous natures of the objects involved. In short, for something to change, which is an effect, it needs to be acted on, caused, by a previous action. This previous action, or change, is an effect as well. Every effect must have a cause. That cause, however, is an effect of a previous cause. Causality is the law that states that each cause has a specific effect, and that this effect is dependent on the identities of the agents involved. Our next topic is nothing. Nothing, or non-existence, is that which doesn't exist. It is not a metaphysical entity. It doesn't exist. It has no identity. It is not an object. Non-existence is a concept that is meaningless by itself. It isn't something. It is a relational concept, gaining meaning only in comparison to another concept. Non-existence gains meaning only in comparison to existence. It is the denial of existence. The concept nothing is a denial of the existence of a particular entity. Both non-existence and nothing are denials of concepts, which must be accepted and understood in order to give meaning to non-existence or nothing. The important point is that nothing is just that, nothing. It doesn't exist. It has no identity. It's not a vacuum. It's not dark. It's not cold. It has no characteristics. As a tool of cognition, it can be useful, but doesn't exist, and we'll finish today with the topic contradictions. A contradiction arises when two ideas each make the other impossible. Contradictions don't exist in reality, because reality simply is as it is, and does not contradict itself. Only our evaluations of reality can contradict each other. If you think you have found a contradiction, then check your premises. Either you're mistaken about it being a contradiction or one of the contradicting concepts has been improperly formed. If the content of your knowledge contains contradictions, then some of your knowledge is in error. Because in order to be successful in reality one must know reality, success requires correct knowledge. It is therefore important to continually search for and root out contradictions in your knowledge, in order to make sure that your knowledge corresponds to reality. The two primary methods for doing this are logic, the art of non-contradictory identification, and integration. This is Lucas Clay signing off with the words, remember to keep an open mind, and always question everything, because without questions knowledge can't grow.